UFC 276, DraftKings has released the salaries so we can take our first look. You can call me Kunith. Let's make some money this week. Last week was There weren't many fighters below 8,000 that won. I think the fighters below 8,000 that won were Josh Parisian, Matus Gamrot, Vanessa Demopoulos. We called Gamrot, we called Demopoulos. But a lot of the fighters that we expected to come through last week did not. However, on the predictions video, we called a lot of methods to victory and the winners correctly. So if you're taking straight bets based on what we talk about here, you're probably in a good spot. But this is a big week. We have 2 championships on the line. We have one of these gloves going out to one of you guys this week. If you don't know by now, the winner of one of these gloves is going to be the winner of our private contest. If you haven't sent me your DraftKings username, make sure you put it in the comments so I can add you to the contest. This is a completely free single entry contest for you to enter to get one of those bad boys up there. Make sure you drop your name. And now we can jump right in. We start at the top of the slate and work our way down. This week, our most expensive fighter is the champion, Israel Adesanya at 9,400. He's going to be defending his belt against Jared Cannonier this week, and Adesanya has got to be the best middleweight we've seen outside of Anderson Silva in his prime, and I don't think anybody's taken this belt from him anytime soon. This matchup with Cannonier doesn't put that in jeopardy either. The champion is going to have a 5-inch height advantage, a few inches in reach as well, and I see Cannonier really struggling to close distance because of Adesanya's movement, footwork, long techniques that disrupt rhythm, and these are things like his long jab, front kick to the body, side kick to the body, and all the feints that he puts out there as well. And another thing about Adesanya that I don't think gets enough attention is how he rarely puts himself in a bad position. He's great at maintaining distance, he's always in control of his body, and you hardly see him do anything that makes you think, oh man, why did you do that? He doesn't really make that many mistakes, so yes, I do think that he wins this fight, and you should put him in your parlays, but from a DraftKings perspective, I'm not so sure. So if we look at the pros and cons, well, the pros are that he's going to win, so he's a safe play, and he has 5 rounds to work with, so he could score a decent amount. He's got access to that high ceiling. However, the cons are that there's absolutely no grappling upside, and if we see him striking alone, then he probably doesn't score that many points, and he doesn't justify this high price tag either. If you look at his 5-round fights outside of his fight with Kelvin Gastelum, he scored 82 points, 49 points against Yoel Romero, 85 points against Marvin Vettori, and that's with 2 reversals. So if you chopped 10 points off and he didn't get those reversals, you're looking at a situation where he scored 75 like he did against Robert Whittaker. Obviously, you don't want the most expensive fighter on the slate to only score you 75 to 85 points. Now, can I see Jared Cannonier getting frustrated, overthrowing on his strikes, getting countered and finished late? Yes, I think it's possible. But I think the most likely outcome is Adesanya by decision. So the pick for this fight is Israel Adesanya by decision. I wouldn't say that he's worth a spot on your roster on DraftKings. I do think he comes in over-owned just because of the name, being the most expensive fighter, being the champion, but I do think we have some and still in the main event. And next at 9,300, we have Sugar Sean O'Malley. He's going to be fighting Pedro Munhoz, and this is a tough fight for Sugar Sean. The matchmaking up until this point for him has been pretty soft. Outside of his fight with Marlon Vera that he did lose, you're looking at a situation where he was matched up against Jose Quinones, who's really struggled in the UFC, Eddie Wineland, who has no chin at all at this point in his career, Thomas Almeida, who's 1-5 in his last 6, Chris Moutinho, who's a human punching bag, and then Raulian Paiva, who we recently saw is still blocking punches with his face. And now he's fighting Pedro Munhoz this week, who is an absolute savage. Pedro Munhoz has had a really long career. He's fought the best of the best. He's eaten some heavy shots from guys like Cody Garbrandt, for example, and he eats them like they're nothing. Now, Sean O'Malley is a knockout artist of the highest order, but you're looking at a situation where Pedro Munhoz has never even been knocked down. So I think there's a good shot that this fight goes the distance, and based on volume, cleaner strikes, big pops from the crowd, I think Sean O'Malley wins, but just like with Israel Adesanya, I don't believe that you're going to need him in your lineups on DraftKings this week, which sounds crazy because if you look at his last 6 fights outside of the Marlon fight, if you look at his last 5 wins, you would have needed him every time. But this week, I think it's a little bit different because we know that O'Malley is not going to be looking for takedowns, and he's not going to post a high score either if he isn't able to, 1, get the finish or even get a knockdown against Pedro Munhoz in this fight. So I would not be surprised if Sean O'Malley goes on to win this fight and only scores around 84 to 88 DraftKings points, but he's going going to be one of the highest owned fighters on the entire slate, so avoiding him may be the move. So the pick for this fight is Sean O'Malley by decision. I don't know what the exact line on this is right now, but I bet you get a better price for him by decision than you would for knockout, and I expect that to be the outcome of this fight. Because let's be real for a second, Sean O'Malley's not going to just knock guys out forever as he starts climbing the ranks. You got guys that really aren't UFC caliber like Jose Quinones, Chris Moutinho. They're going to eat shots. Raulian Paiva's going to eat more shots than he needs to. Eddie Wineland doesn't have a chin anymore. These guys are going to go down. Pedro Munhoz is not like that. And neither are the guys at the top of the division. So I'm excited to see how Sean O'Malley deals with this step up in competition. So I still think he wins, but don't expect them to go out there and starch somebody like Pedro Munhoz in the first or second round. Next at 9,200, we have Andre Muniz. I absolutely love this guy. I've rostered him in his last 3 fights. He's come through every time. His jiu-jitsu is a problem, and he's fighting Uriah Hall this week, who's a one-dimensional striker well beyond his prime. And frankly, I don't see how Uriah Hall wins this fight. Uriah Hall's athleticism, takedown defense, ability to get knockouts, those are all fading as he's getting older. And not for nothing, I think Andre Muniz is the dark horse in this division. I think he's a nightmare for anyone at 185 right now, and when you look at his UFC fights and his Contender Series fights, he literally hasn't lost a round. He's gotten takedowns in every one of his UFC fights, and I expect this to be no different. I expect him to take Uriah Hall down, submit him in the first round, second at the very latest. He's an excellent DraftKings play this week. I actually think that he makes more sense rostering in your lineups than somebody like Adesanya or O'Malley because of the matchup, and that gives you pretty good leverage because, again, those two are going to carry higher ownership. Andre Muniz is going to go a little bit under the radar in comparison, so I think that he makes a ton of sense, and the pick for me in this fight is Andre Muniz by submission. Next at 9,100, we have Maycee Baber. She's going to be fighting Jessica Eye this week. This is way too high a price to pay for Maycee Baber. You're paying Range Rover price for a Kia in this spot. I don't think that you should roster her. And the reason why I say that is because she's low output, she's good but not a great grappler, and she's fighting Jessica Eye, who is tough if anything. And typically Maycee Baber is the one that's going to be moving forward. She is aggressive. She's going to push Jessica Eye up against the cage, and she's going to work for takedowns from there. I don't see her landing a ton of significant strikes on the feet unless you count strikes like these as significant.
The thing about her technique, no, she landed takedown in the third,
but what she does have going for her is that Jessica Eye doesn't defend takedowns all that well, and she's looking like she's at her career worst at this point. This is almost a 12-year age gap between the two of them, so that gives me a ton of confidence on the Barber side to out-hustle her during wrestling scrambles, and to just be the quicker fighter overall. I do think that this fight goes the distance. Taking the over would make a lot of sense, but if you wanted to sweeten the deal, you would take Maycee Baber by decision. And if you wanted to put together a 4-leg parlay with what we just talked about, Barber, Muniz, O'Malley, Adesanya, that comes out to around plus 258. That makes a lot of sense. Seems like a no-brainer. Fading Maycee Baber on DraftKings also seems like a no-brainer this week because she probably scores around 80 points. You see 79 points here, 54 points in a win right there. She doesn't score that well typically, especially if it goes the distance. And an 80-point win when you have 2 5-round fights on the card and a lot of finishes coming from other places, absolutely not. But the pick for me is Maycee Baber by decision. And next at 9,000, we have Alexander Volkanovski. He's our co-main event favorite. We're getting the trilogy between him and Max Holloway this week. These guys stand alone at the top of their division at this point, and I would be content if they fought each other once a year. That would be fine with me. Since their fights, both of them have fought twice. Max Holloway has landed 698 strikes in his 2 wins, and Volkanovski destroyed Bryan Ortega and the Korean Zombie, who looked like he had no business being in there. So both of these guys have been super impressive, and when you look at the fights that they had, watching live, I thought that Max Holloway won the second fight. But ultimately, the judges gave it to Volkanovski, and I think a lot of that had to do with him mixing in the takedowns, the forward pressure, the leg kicks. And Holloway wasn't really addressing the low kick, and honestly, it didn't seem like it bothered him all that much, but the judges do take those strikes into consideration. But I thought that Max's boxing looked better. He dropped Volkanovski early. I knew that there was a third fight on the way. I just thought that it would be on different terms. And I really want to pick Max Holloway here because if he does just check those leg kicks and stays busy with the hands, I think that he's going to win. But it is hard to bet against somebody like Volkanovski, who is a tank in this weight class, and he's looking super fast lately. So it's a tough call, but I am going to say that Max Holloway wins by decision. And if you think back to last week, we sniffed this out with Mateusz Gamrot in the main event. We knew that it was going to be competitive, he wasn't going to be dominated, and if the rounds were close and it goes the distance, I want my money on the underdog. I feel the same way here because it will go the distance. The judges have all the power. Just think about it. And next at 8,800, we have Ian Garry. But before we get into that, make sure you like the video, subscribe to the channel, make sure you comment something for the algorithm because, well, you know how the algorithm works. And by the way, thanks to all of you, I am a YouTube partner now, which feels pretty cool. So thank you so much for all of the support. I really do appreciate it. Now, again, we have Ian Garry this week. He's 8,800. He's fighting Gabe Green. Ian Garry's coming off of one of the least impressive wins I've ever seen over Darian Weeks. In that fight, the first 2 rounds were close, and he did start to pull away in the third, but that was a fight where many people expected him to go out there and pick up a quick knockout. Now he's got Gabe Green on his hands, who does not just have dog in him, he's got a whole kennel. I wouldn't be shocked if Gabe Green's alarm clock every morning was DMX. Rest in peace. We saw Gabe Green beat the brakes off of Phil Hawes and eat the best shots from Johan Lioness, who punches like a mantis shrimp, but ultimately he was able to put him down in the second round. I was shocked to see the odds the way that they are for this fight because I fully believe that Gabe Green is going to smoke Ian Garry this week. Ian Garry was getting touched up bad by Jordan Williams in his UFC debut, and he was giving up a lot of ground in his fight against Darian Weeks. And he likes to counter-strike, so it makes sense that he's moving backward, but taking back steps against a guy like Gabe Green is not something that you want to do. You don't want to give this guy an inch. And Gabe Green is going to come at him fast. He's going to throw big punches of his own, look for takedowns, and ultimately I think that he's going to overwhelm Ian Garry, who hasn't seen all that much adversity in the cage. Ian Garry's O has to go. The pick for me is Gabe Green inside the distance, making him an excellent play on DraftKings this week. Next at 8,700, we have Jim Miller. He's fighting Donald Cerrone, who lost the opportunity to fight a legend, and now he gets to fight an even bigger legend in Jim Miller. If you don't know, Donald Cerrone has had to make weight twice in the last 45 days or so, but both of his fights were canceled. Now he has to do it again a week later against Jim Miller, who's an even tougher matchup than Joe Lozon would have been. Jim Miller's been putting people out lately with clean, powerful boxing, and we know that he's super slick on the ground. I actually think that he is better than Cowboy everywhere at this point. Cowboy is chinny. He's going to be depleted from yet another weight cut, which shouldn't be as bad as the first two since they're fighting at 170, but that means that Jim Miller's barely cutting any weight for this fight. And if this fight hits the mat, I expect Jim Miller to get the better of the scrambles as well. But ultimately, what I see happening in this matchup is Miller hitting Cowboy with something heavy on the feet, making him shell up. Miller pours it on and the ref steps in. I like Jim Miller inside the distance this week. I wouldn't be surprised if we saw a club and sub either, but I think that Jim Miller is a very strong play up here at 8,700. Next at 8,600, we have Jessica Rose Clark. She's going to be fighting Julija Stoliarenko this week, and this is actually a very tough fight to call. Jessica Rose Clark is more experienced, the better wrestler, of course, but that's about it. We picked against her in her last fight because she was the same exact price that she is now against Stephanie Egger, who we thought could submit her, and that's exactly what happened. So here we are again. History is repeating itself. She's 8,600 on DraftKings against Julija Stoliarenko, who could end up submitting her with the same exact technique and armbar. Because we know that Jessica Rose Clark is going to shoot for takedowns, and she's going to get them, no question. But can she stop the submission attempts coming from bottom? I'm not sure. In Stoliarenko's last fight against Alexis Davis, she was taken down, snatched up an arm right away, and it looked like she was almost going to finish this fight inside the first round. She wasn't able to finish that submission, but Alexis Davis is a super veteran, extremely strong grappler, and armbar defense at the highest level is pretty damn good. Where I struggle is to believe that Jessica Rose Clark is at that level. If anyone is going to lose to an armbar from guard to a fighter who's 0-4 in the UFC, it's Jessica Rose Clark. So for me, this fight goes one of two ways. Either she lays and prays for 3 rounds and gets a ton of control time, a lot of takedowns, and you're going to need her on DraftKings, or she gets armbarred in the first or second round and you're going to need Julija Stoliarenko on DraftKings, which makes this super tough because you're going to need one side of this matchup and it's hard to trust either. The winner of this fight probably scores around 95 DraftKings points, so it makes it really tough because I could see Jessica Rose Clark getting takedowns early, losing focus around the second round, getting caught with an armbar, tapping right away. So because of that, I think that we have to take a shot on the underdog if you are to roster this matchup, which you're probably going to need. And from a straight betting perspective, Julija Stoliarenko as the underdog, sweeten the deal plus the submission, you're looking at a situation where you can get pretty good odds on that. And women's underdogs have been very good to us lately. We had Natalia Silva come through 2 weeks ago. Vanessa Demopoulos came through last week. I think Julija Stoliarenko keeps the train rolling this week. I have her by submission. Next at 8,500, we have Robbie Lawler. He's going to be fighting Bryan Barberena this week. I don't know how you pick against Bryan Barberena in this fight. Barberena's durability and output are going to win him this fight. He's going to land over 100 strikes like he normally does, and he's going to win a decision in this spot. Because because the reality is Robbie Lawler is washed up. He's a legend, former champion. He gave us some of the best fights we've ever seen, but he is 40 years old, and his most recent wins are Nick Diaz, Cowboy Cerrone, and Carlos Condit, the AARP division. Outside of that, he's looked bad. He was dominated against Neil Magny, dominated by Colby Covington. He is Ben Askren's only UFC win, albeit controversial, but it's Ben Askren.
Ben Askren's built like a bag of milk.
Robbie Lawler is a journeyman with the UFC record of 20-15, and these are facts. I don't want to sound like I'm trying to pile on the legend here, but it is what it is. Bryan Barberena has some of the worst takedown defense we've ever seen in the UFC, but I don't expect Lawler to go in there and try to take him down. I see them standing and trading for 15 minutes, and Bryan Barberena 1000% is going to land more strikes. And he should win a decision, but like we talked about recently, don't be surprised if close rounds go to Robbie Lawler. As much as I hate to admit it, the judging is sus all the time, and at the end of this, we can clearly see a 2-1 victory for Bryan Barberena that just gets judged the other way. So I think that Bryan Barberena outpaces him. I think he lands more strikes. I think he looks better in the third round, but don't be surprised if the judges give it to Robbie Lawler. The pick for me is Bryan Barberena by decision, but proceed with caution. Next at 8,400, we have Jalin Turner. He's fighting Brad Riddell this week. Jalin Turner might be that dude. He has 12 wins with 12 finishes. He's put together a nice winning streak in the UFC as well. What gives me the most confidence in him this week are just the big physical differences. They're wild. He's going to have an 8-inch height advantage, a 6-inch reach advantage, plus he's a southpaw versus Riddell's orthodox stance, so the kicks are going to be there for him. I expect his long punches and kicks are going to give Riddell issues on the feet, and Riddell, being the shorter man, is going to try to get under those techniques and probably look for takedowns, which for Riddell, I think trying to take Jalin Turner down is a bigger mistake than trying to strike with him. I think that if this fight does hit the mat, Turner's going to wrap up a submission with those long, slender arms. He's going to find the neck at some point. So in my opinion, Riddell's best bet is to strike in this matchup, but I think that's going to be tremendously difficult for him. Like, think back to Deron Winn. Now, yes, Deron Winn is on the burger list, but when you look at his fight against Phil Hawes, he had no answer for the size difference. Riddell is much better than Deron Winn, but he still has similar challenges on his hands when it comes to trying to close the distance against a much bigger fighter. I think that Jalin Turner is an absolute steal at these odds. I think that he's a steal at this price, and at 8,400, he makes a lot of things work with your DraftKings lineup. So the pick for me in this fight is going to be Jalin Turner inside the distance. I believe it's likely to be a submission. Next at 8,300, we have Alex Pereira. He's going to be fighting Sean Strickland this week. I wish this was a 5-round fight because this is going to be a banger. Alex Pereira is the favorite because he's got world-class striking, but I don't think that he should be the favorite in this fight. I really like Sean Strickland in this matchup, and I think we're getting a gift having him as an underdog this week. Sean Strickland is super experienced. He has great output, some of the best striking defense on the roster, and he could turn into a wrestler when he needs to, which he might need to in this spot, and on top of that, he's got a great chin. Alex Pereira completely outclassed Bruno Silva in his last fight, but before that, in his UFC debut, he dropped the first round against Andres Michailidis. And Andres Michailidis is on the burger list. And you might be thinking, Kunith, what's the burger list? Let me tell you. It's a list of the biggest burgers in the UFC who have yet to be cut. Getting cut from the UFC is the only way off this list. Last week, JP Buys got his name embroidered on the burger list, but he might have to be taken out because I don't think we'll see him in the UFC anymore. Tafon Chukwi is definitely on the burger list. Gina Mazzani is on the burger list, and so is Andres Michailidis. But I say that to say this, if Michailidis is able to get this guy down and have success grappling, Sean Strickland is absolutely going to be able to do that. Coupled with the better output and the pressure, I expect Sean Strickland to win a decision here. The only way that I see Pereira winning is by catching Strickland with a big punch and knocking him out. But other than that, I think that he's outgunned in this matchup, and if he doesn't get the knockout, he's not going to win the minutes, which means he's not going to win the rounds. So the pick for me is Sean Strickland by decision. And next at 8,200, we have Brad Tavares. He's going to be fighting Dricus du Plessis this week. Tavares has been in the UFC forever. He's got a lot of miles on him, and stylistically, this is a bad matchup for him. Tavares doesn't have a ton of power. He doesn't throw that many strikes, and the takedown defense plus the physical strength of du Plessis is going to keep him from wrestling in this fight. On the other side, you have du Plessis, who has a ton of power. He's a big guy, and he doesn't need to worry about what's coming back at him. He's 2-0 in the UFC with back-to-back knockouts. I'm surprised he's priced as an underdog in this fight because I think he has all the tools to not only win, but to pick up the finish as as well. He has a 100% finish rate in his career, and I think that he keeps that alive this week. This is a card where there are a lot of underdogs who I think are going to overperform, while the heavy favorites are going to underperform when it comes to fantasy. And I think that Dricus du Plessis is one of these guys who's going to overperform as an underdog, and he's going to score you a lot of points. I see him winning by way of club and sub. I see him getting a finish inside the first 2 rounds. The pick for me in this fight is Dricus du Plessis inside the distance. And I'll quickly just go through the plays at 8,000 and below for you. If you haven't already, like the video, subscribe to the channel, comment something for the algorithm. Who's your favorite underdog this week? Let me know. Again, we have Dricus du Plessis, who I think is an absolute steal at this price. I think that he's going to knock out Brad Tavares or get a submission in this fight. Sean Strickland, I see him winning a decision this week. He might do a lot of striking, so he might not score a ton of points on DraftKings, so buyer beware. I think this is a matchup that's going to be heavily owned on both sides, and you might not need either. Brad Riddell, I think that he's completely outgunned in this spot. I don't think that he's going to be able to win. I don't see how he wins this fight, quite honestly. Bryan Barberena, he should win this fight. He probably is going to win this fight, even if the judges don't think so. That's what's scary to me. I see the judges giving Robbie Lawler the rub, unless we have some real clear definitive dominance from Bryan Barberena for at least 2 of the 3 rounds. Julija Stoliarenko, I mean, she's going to come in at super low ownership, and if she wraps up an arm, it's good night. You're going to need that on your lineup. Donald Cerrone is just so shot at this point that I really don't want to bet him. He is going to be much bigger than Jim Miller, but I don't know if he's going to be able to handle the power that's coming his way. And I know that Jim Miller's not Francis Ngannou by any means, but if he's able to put together a couple of clean punches and just touch him, I think that's all it's going to take. Gabe Green, absolute savage. I don't see how he doesn't beat Ian Garry in this spot. I could see him getting chin checked, but then again, I think that Ian Garry is going to spend a lot of time dancing around, skirting around the outside of the octagon. I think Gabe Green's going to be able to cut him off, get him down, rough him up on the feet, and I think by the time they hit the 3rd round, he's going to really take over and finish him. Max Holloway, listen, man, Max Holloway needs to get this belt back, I'm telling you. And of course, if he gets the belt back, then we have a 4th fight on our hands, which I am not worried about at all. I would welcome that with open arms. But when you talk about one of the most exciting fighters in the game, one of the best champions that the UFC has ever had, this guy comes to fight more than maybe anybody ever. Like, look at the amount of strikes that he throws. It's absolutely crazy. And I think that if he throws around 200 plus this week, he has to get the win. Jessica I would never put money on Jessica Uriah Hall, I think that he's outgunned. I think that Andre Muniz is one of the most slept on fighters, not only in the division, but in the UFC. But people will start taking notice soon. Pedro Munhoz is going to do well for the gang because he's going to survive for all 3 rounds. He's not getting knocked down. He's going to throw some power back Sean O'Malley's way as well. Maybe throw some leg kicks that really give Sean O'Malley problems. I like Pedro Munhoz to survive this week and make it so that Sean O'Malley's not a must play on DraftKings. And then the killer gorilla, Jared Cannonier. I just don't think that he has the skill set to beat Adesanya. He has power, but everybody's got power. I don't think that he has anything that Adesanya's never seen before. I think physically he's really going to struggle to reach Adesanya. I think that he's going to get frustrated and make mistakes, and I think Israel Adesanya just outclasses him for 25 minutes. Those are the picks this week. I would suggest that you listen to this video and take some of these props that we talk about by decision, by knockout, by submission, because they tend to come through. And if you've made it to this point in the video, thank you so much for watching. Again, we made YouTube partner because of you. Thank you so much. And lastly, if you have not, drop your DraftKings username in the comments if I haven't added you as a friend already, because this glove right here is on the line this week for whoever wins the contest. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you later in the week.